Have you ever felt like you were being broken inside, but in silence, as if something inside you was falling apart while the world outside keeps running, indifferent to your invisible collapse? Maybe you are there, trying to understand why life seems so slow, so hard, so without answers. But what if I told you that this emptiness that hurts is not punishment? It is foundation. We live in an era that interprets pain as punishment and not as preparation, as if suffering were a failure in the system and not an essential part of reconstruction. This distorted view transforms the sacred process of inner polishing into a cycle of self-criticism and escape. Pain, which should bring us closer to the soul, is treated as a mistake to be corrected quickly. But the truth is different. God did not put you in punishment. God put you in construction. There is a silent crisis happening, especially among those who carry the weight of expectations. Men and women confuse haste with progress. They think that rushing is a sign of strength, when in fact, many times it is fear in disguise. Fear of not being enough. Fear of not having value if there are no immediate results. And in this rush, they forget that all divine work begins with digging. You have to go deep before you can climb high. Napoleon Hill, in his silent wisdom, once said that failure is a blessing in disguise, because it does not destroy, it reveals. It shows what is still out of alignment. It exposes weak points, not to humiliate, but to strengthen them. Andrew Carnegie taught that steel only grows stronger under pressure, and the same goes for the soul. Without pressure, there is no density. Without resistance, there is no structure. Without pain, there is no presence. The biggest trap on the spiritual journey is to believe that all pain comes to punish us, when, in fact, part of it comes to shape us. There is pain that breaks, but there is pain that builds. And knowing how to differentiate them is the beginning of vibrational wisdom. The pain that breaks you away from yourself. The pain that builds brings you closer to who you really are. Not to what the world expected, but what you were born to sustain. So perhaps the silence you feel today is not absence. Maybe it is polishing. Maybe what seems to be being taken from your life is just being removed from the path so that something more solid, more aligned, more true can be born. God is not silent. He is working. If this message has touched something deep inside you, write in the comments, "I am under construction." Your soul knows that this is not the end. It is the beginning. The emptiness you feel is not a failure. It is a foundation. He did not come to show how far behind you are, but how much you are being prepared. There is a profound difference between absence and abandonment, but when the soul is fragile, it tends to confuse silence with rejection, delay with contempt, pause with giving up, and that is when anxiety grows, because we grow up hearing that results are signs of progress, that productivity is synonymous with value. But the soul does not obey these standards. It flourishes in the time of the invisible. Many look around and see what they do not have. They see closed doors, opportunities that didn't come, relationships that fell apart, and they think that all of this is a sign of failure, but it's not. It's preparation. The lack of results can be the greatest gift in disguise, because before building anything solid, the universe needs to remove everything that is fragile, everything that doesn't support your truth. Everything that was built to please, to fit in, to prove. Everything that has no roots. You may think you're alone, that nothing is moving, but in the subtle field, where energy builds before matter, the greatest works are done in silence. Because only in silence can you hear the true direction. Only in emptiness can you recognize the essential. Only in scarcity can you learn to see abundance as a state and not as possession. Emptiness is not the end. It is the foundation of the new version of you. A version that doesn't depend on applause to have value, that doesn't depend on speed to feel purpose. This foundation cannot be rushed. It needs time, truth, dedication. When the universe takes away, it's not punishing you, it's clearing the ground. And if you resist cleaning, you resist the construction itself. Therefore, embrace what seems like absence as the beginning of the sacred. Because every solid house begins with a bare floor, with a clean space, with a place where the ego can no longer decide, where only the soul can speak. And when she speaks, Everything changes because you start to remember that what is being taken away, in fact, never belonged to you, and what is being prepared is already yours by vibrational right. You are not empty. You are being excavated so that you can finally become habitable for the purpose that chose you. Haste is an unconscious way of rejecting the process. It doesn't seem like it at first glance, because we have been conditioned to admire haste, to associate speed with competence, to see delay as a lack of faith or effort. But often, haste is not courage. It is fear. It is the desperate attempt to escape from ourselves before silence reveals truths that we are not ready to hear. Urgency is not always spiritual. In many cases, it is trauma. Trauma that has learned that only those who deliver quickly, who resolve things quickly, who never fail, are valuable. And so, we create goals that do not come from the soul. They come from fear. We run not to get there, but to escape the feeling of falling behind. But who defines what it means to be behind? Who convinced you that you need to rush all the time to be worthy of respect, love, and peace? There is a silent addiction to wanting to get there quickly, to rushing through steps, to skipping pain. But this addiction hides a deeper fear, that of not being enough, of being forgotten, of being seen as slow, weak, inefficient. And so we sabotage ourselves with unrealistic goals. We compare ourselves to other people's paths, and we punish ourselves for not being where we think we should be. But the soul doesn't work by the clock. It works frequently. When you are in a hurry, you are in resistance, and everything you resist persists. Rushing closes your hearing. It closes your heart. It closes the possibility of healing yourself from the inside out. Because there is no way to speed up what only reveals itself in the right time. The process is wiser than the ego. It knows exactly where to cut, where to heal, where to strengthen. But if you try to rush, you interrupt the construction. You skip steps, you build on sand. And it's not about settling, it's about aligning. It's about letting go of demands and entering into trust. It's about recognizing that faith isn't about saying, "I believe." It's about staying present, even when nothing seems to be happening. It's about continuing to water, even when you don't see anything sprouting. It's about continuing to breathe with an open heart, even when life seems to be on hold. Because it's in the pause that the root grows deeper. It's in the darkness that the seed expands. It's in the invisible that the structure is established. When you exchange hois for presence, everything changes, because the universe responds to your vibration, not to your anxiety. God doesn't move out of desperation. He moves out of coherence. And coherence requires time. It requires silence. It requires surrender. So perhaps the greatest test of faith is not running after it, but staying where you are, with an intact heart, until the soil is ready to sustain that which you so much ask for. Manifesting isn't about demanding, it's about allowing. There's an energetic difference between someone who asks with an open heart and someone who demands with a tense heart. Because when you demand, you're not manifesting, you're trying to control. And every attempt at control comes from fear, not trust. Truly manifesting is about making space. It's about aligning yourself internally with what you desire, not just mentally, but vibrationally. Because the universe doesn't respond to what you want, it responds to what you are. While you wait, the energy of demand creates blockages. When you demand that something happen your way and in your time, you prevent the divine flow from surprising you with something even more aligned than your mind can imagine. Desire becomes a prison, expectation becomes anxiety, and the soul disconnects from the present, always waiting for the future to feel peace. But peace is not the destination, it's the path. If you can't feel it now, it won't come when your desire comes true either. Allowing is different. Allowing is trusting that what is meant for you already exists in a dimension that your eyes can't yet see. It's releasing the flow, even when reality still seems contrary. It's feeling before seeing. It's being grateful before receiving. It is about tuning into the emotion of what you want and not just mentally repeating what you want. Because what you feel, you create. And what you feel coherently, you sustain. This vibrational re-education is profound. It requires more than technique. It requires truth. What you feel while you wait is as important as what you wait for. If you vibrate need while you ask, you feed the absence. If you vibrate desperation while you ask, you reinforce fear. If you vibrate distrust while you ask, you block the flow. Manifestation is the consequence of an inner presence that already lives what it desires, even if it has not yet materialized. It's not about giving up on your dream. It's about changing the way you relate to it. It's about letting go of the need and choosing the frequency. It's about remembering that everything that comes lightly remains. Everything that is forced collapses. Allowing is accepting that God knows the time, the way, and the path, and that your task is not to control, but to sustain the vibration of those who trust, of those who already feel whole, of those who know that what is true never comes by force, but always comes by faith. Pain reveals the part of you that still doesn't trust. It doesn't just appear to hurt, but to show where your faith has not yet taken root, where you still try to control, where you are still afraid of losing, where you still believe you need to prove something to be loved, accepted, respected. Pain has surgical precision. It doesn't visit just any place. It goes straight to the point where your identity is misaligned with your essence. It touches exactly where you insist on remaining the same when it's time to transform. Every time pain appears, it carries a silent question. What inside me is still trying to maintain control? Because control is the opposite of surrender. And where there is control, there is no trust. That is why many pains are repeated. Not because you are being punished, but because you still haven't understood what needs to be released. Because you still insist on sustaining an identity that no longer matches what your soul wants to experience. Look courageously at what hurts. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Ask yourself, what exactly am I feeling? What am I trying to control with this feeling? What do I fear losing if I simply let go? These questions are not intellectual. They are spiritual. They reveal the points of internal resistance that prevent you from accessing the flow. Because pain is not an interruption. Pain is an invitation to go back inside, to recognize the part of you that still doesn't feel safe in God's hands. When you embrace this pain, instead of fighting it, something changes. The rigidity begins to melt. The anxiety diminishes. The rush quiets down. And in place of fear, a different kind of strength is born. A strength that no longer needs to shout, that no longer needs to prove itself, that simply trusts. Trusts that everything has a time, that every silence has a purpose, that even chaos obeys an invisible order. Pain only becomes unbearable when you try to run away from it. But when you face it with presence and compassion, it begins to reveal itself as a teacher, as a map, as a portal. Because all pain that is crossed with awareness ceases to be suffering and becomes expansion. And when you learn to cross with love, that which before only generated fear, you don't just heal, you transform. And this silent transformation is what God expects to be able to build something eternal in you. When life stops you, it's because your ego is accelerating without direction. It seems contradictory, but it's not. Sometimes, the biggest external blocks are not punishments. They are signs. Signs that something inside you is running too fast without knowing where it's going. That you are looking outside for something that can only be resolved inside. The block, the obstacle, the forced pause. All of this can be an attempt by the universe to realign you with something more true. Because moving forward without direction is not progress. It is exhaustion. The ego is in a hurry. It wants to resolve, prove, conquer. It wants life to obey its urgencies. But the soul has a different rhythm. It does not move out of anxiety. It moves out of truth. And when these two frequencies are out of sync, the body feels it. The mind collapses. Life slows down, not because you're being rejected, but because you're being redirected. The block is often a course correction that can only happen when everything stops. Neuroscience has already confirmed what the ancient masters have always known. The emotional system needs breaks. The limbic system where your emotional responses reside, needs time to integrate, process, restore. And if you do not stop by choice, life stops by necessity, because your energy field cannot sustain expansion when it is in internal collapse. And no spiritual request goes beyond your level of emotional coherence. If you ask for growth, but you are vibrating confusion, the universe responds to what you vibrate, not to what you verbalize. That is why some doors close even when everything seemed right, not because they were wrong, but because you were not ready yet. Because moving in that direction, at that moment, would mean strengthening patterns that needed to die. Because continuing without pause would mean feeding a path that would take you away from your real structure. The block, then, is not the end. It is the sacred interval between the old and the new, between what was impulse and what will be purpose. And in this space between the will of the ego and the wisdom of the soul, you are invited to breathe differently, to not insist forcefully, but to listen with presence. Because only those who accept to stop listen, only those who accept to be silent understand, only those who accept to unlearn, realign. And sometimes, everything needs to stop so that you can finally hear what God has been trying to tell you for a long time. Stop running, feel, surrender, rebuild, because only that which is built in coherence resists time, and only that which is born from silence sustains eternity. Purpose does not come ready-made. It is built on the ruins of what you thought you wanted. This is one of the most painful and, at the same time, most liberating revelations of the spiritual journey, because we grow up believing that purpose is something that is found, as if it were a prize reserved only for the most enlightened or most successful. But purpose is not a final destination. It is a path that reveals itself step by step between losses, collapses, silences, and new beginnings. Most people associate purpose with the external achievements, with a job, a mission, a prominent position. But true purpose begins when all of this falls apart, when what you swore was your mission begins to lose its meaning, when the plans you made with such care become too tight for the new version of who you are becoming. That is when the ruins appear. Ruins of the ego, ruins of attachments, ruins of who you tried to be to fit into worlds that were never yours. And in the ruins, the soul whispers, because it is when everything falls apart that you begin to hear what really matters, what is essential, what moves you inside, what connects you with something greater than your own survival. It was like that with so many who today carry light in their eyes. It was like that with men who only discovered their mission after they lost everything, after bankruptcy, the end, despair, when there was no image left to sustain, only truth to embrace. Pain in this process is not an enemy, it is a tool. It clears away what was being used as a disguise. It dislodges old patterns. It removes masks. Because purpose is not born on stage, it is born backstage. It is not born in applause, it is born in mourning, in silence, in surrender. It does not come to massage the ego, it comes to align the soul. And this often requires loss. It requires breaking expectations. It requires detachment from what you thought you would be, so that you can become who you really came to be. Therefore, do not fear the ruins. They may be the most fertile ground of your existence. Because when you let go of what was an illusion, what remains is truth. And only truth sustains a purpose. A real, aligned, coherent purpose. One that does not depend on applause, validation, or recognition. A purpose that is born from within, silent but firm. And that, once assumed, no longer needs to be sought, because it is already a living part of who you have become. Silence is not absence. It is vibrational preparation. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept when we are in the midst of waiting, because silence seems empty. It seems like abandonment. It seems like a negative response. But in truth, silence is the sacred interval where the invisible construction takes place. It is there, without noise, without apparent signs, without external confirmations, that God works in the deepest layers of his frequency. He is not silent out of indifference. He is silent out of precision. We live in a world where noise has become synonymous with movement, where immediate responses are confused with connection, where the absence of signs makes us question whether we are still on the path. But the soul does not feed on noise. It flourishes in stillness. And what is being prepared for you in the invisible requires a stable, consistent, rooted, vibrational field. That is why, many times before manifesting, you need to be silent. Be silent to listen. Be silent to align. Be silent to become compatible with that which you ask for. Neville Goddard said that the invisible is reality in gestation. That which has not yet materialized is already alive on a more subtle plane. It is being formed, aligned, sustained. And it is in this invisible field that true creation takes place. The mind may not see it, the eyes may doubt it, but the heart feels it. And if the heart feels it with truth, with coherence, with surrender, then the invisible is already more real than the apparent absence. It is necessary to develop a new perspective on silence. It is not emptiness, it is space. Space for the soul to reorganize itself, for the body to integrate, for the mind to detoxify itself from urgencies. It is in silence that the root grows. It is in silence that the earth grows stronger. It is in silence that you stop looking for answers outside and begin to listen to the voice that has never abandoned you, your own essence, whispering the truth that you always knew but had forgotten. Allowing yourself this silence is not passivity. It is active participation in the divine process. It is choosing to vibrate confidence even without evidence. It is deciding to remain whole even without guarantees. It is sustaining the frequency even without applause. Because what is coming to you is not being delayed. It is being prepared. And when it finally manifests, you will understand why so much silence was necessary. Because only that which is generated in silence has the structure to remain. And only those who go through silence with faith have the frequency to sustain what destiny has already written. Emotional frequency sustains your manifestation more than your words. And this may sound strange at first, especially if you grew up believing that it was enough to say the right things, repeat affirmations, maintain positive thoughts. But energetic reality goes beyond words. It goes beyond the conscious mind. Life responds to your vibration, not to your appearance. And vibration does not lie. You can speak of faith and vibrate fear. You can repeat gratitude and vibrate scarcity. You can declare love and vibrate neediness. The inconsistency between what you say and what you feel creates subtle but powerful noises in the field of manifestation, because the universe captures not only what you ask for, but what you emotionally sustain while you ask. And if the emotion that sustains your request is doubt, distrust, or anxiety, that is what echoes in the energy field, not your declared intention. Many people think they are not manifesting because they are not asking correctly. But, in fact, what is misaligned is not the request. It is the frequency with which the request is experienced. It is the feeling that accompanies the wait. It is the vibration with which one lives each day before the answer arrives. And therein lies one of the greatest spiritual challenges: aligning emotion with desire, feeling as if it were already real, inhabiting the frequency before the form, sustaining the field, even without external confirmation. Small emotional inconsistencies sabotage great requests. A moment of doubt fed by repetition becomes a blockage. A repressed emotion turns into vibrational interference, and the most subtle can become the most decisive. It's not about having perfect emotions all the time. It's about not identifying with emotions that take you off-center, about recognizing when you're out of alignment and gently returning to center, about developing intimacy with your emotional field so that it becomes fertile ground, not a minefield. Manifestation happens when there is harmony between what you feel, think, and believe, when your body, mind, and heart are moving in the same direction. This coherence is not created with effort. It comes from self-knowledge, presence, listening, from a silent commitment to your own truth. When you learn to live in the emotional state of what you desire, time ceases to be an obstacle, because the right frequency attracts what is yours. And what is yours does not need to be forced. It just needs to be felt, with presence, with wholeness, with truth. Spiritual anxiety, when you want to evolve without facing the shadow. This is one of the most subtle deviations from the inner path. It is the moment when the desire to grow, to awaken, to align with something greater, turns into a new type of escape. Running away from pain in the name of light. Seeking the high, without facing what is hurting down there. Repeating mantras without listening to one's own wounds. Meditating on love, but still avoiding the anger that screams inside one's chest. Spiritual anxiety manifests itself when you want the result of healing without going through the process of truth. When you seek answers that relieve, but not that transform. When you run after practices, books, videos, not to go deeper, but to distract yourself. And all of this may seem like evolution. It may seem like commitment. But at its root, it is often fear. Fear of stopping. Fear of facing. Fear of entering into the necessary pain that precedes true liberation. Every shadow that is not welcomed turns into sabotage, into internal noise, into repetition of patterns that you swear you have overcome. Because true evolution is not linear. It is cyclical, deep, spiraling. It invites you to revisit the same pains on increasingly subtle levels. And each time you deny this visit, the anxiety grows, because the soul knows. It senses that you are trying to escape the most sacred part of the process, the crossing of pain. Crossing pain is the initiation of purpose. There is no solid construction without a deep foundation, and there is no foundation without excavation. The purpose you seek so much is not in the heights. It is hidden exactly where it hurts, in the unhealed rejection, in the unseen guilt, in the fear that still governs your choices. When you accept to cross this layer with presence, something opens, something aligns, something is freed. It doesn't take heroic courage, it takes surrender. It's necessary to stop chasing the light and allow the light to find you where you really are. In the midst of doubt, in the midst of fear, in the midst of confusion, because it is there, in that seemingly chaotic place, that true alchemy begins. It's not about moving away from the shadow. It's about integrating it. It's about allowing even the most frightened part of you to be embraced by consciousness. Only after that does evolution happen, not as a prize, but as a natural consequence. Because those who cross the shadow with consciousness don't just heal themselves. They become a channel. They become a bridge. They become presence. And presence heals more than any technique, because presence is living proof that the light is not out there. It is born within, exactly in the place where pain used to live. Without emotional discipline, even faith becomes chaos. Because faith, when it is not supported by presence and coherence, becomes anxious expectation. It becomes urgency disguised as spirituality. It becomes an attempt to control the invisible with the tools of the ego. And that doesn't work. Manifestation doesn't happen through force. It happens through frequency. And frequency is the result of inner discipline, vibrational constancy, and emotional integrity. Most people believe that faith is believing with strength, that it's repeating over and over that something will happen. But real faith is more silent than loud, more stable than intense. True faith reveals itself in the way you feel when everything is still, in the way you behave when answers are slow, in the way you vibrate in the face of uncertainty. Without this inner stability, even the most beautiful faith fragments, because there is no emotional support to keep it alive. Joe Dispenza talks about this clearly. Without heart coherence, there is no conscious creation. And what is heart coherence, if not the union between emotion, thought, and intention? When the heart is misaligned with what the mind affirms, the vibrational field breaks, and a broken field does not manifest. A misaligned field does not sustain. That's why emotional discipline is not a luxury. It's a foundation. It is the invisible practice that makes the visible miracle possible. And discipline here is not repression. It is not forcing yourself to feel what you do not feel. It is the opposite. It is developing intimacy with your own feelings. It is knowing when your emotions are asking for acceptance and not escape. It is recognizing the internal cycles, the triggers, the patterns, and instead of reacting, choosing with awareness, choosing where you want to vibrate, choosing what you want to feed, choosing what you want to sustain, even when the world seems to collapse. This discipline is not achieved overnight. It is built with silence, with practice, with presence, with falls and new beginnings. But little by little, it takes root. And when it takes root, it protects you from the oscillation of the world, because it no longer matters what happens outside. You learn to keep the inside aligned. You learn to be faithful to your frequency, not to your fears. And this silent fidelity transforms everything, because the universe responds to vibrational constancy with aligned manifestation. And constancy only arises when emotion learns to rest in faith, not as a belief, but as a state of being. The universe does not respond to your desire. It responds to your state. And this is one of the most challenging and transformative keys to the spiritual journey. Because we live surrounded by the idea that it is enough to want something badly, to desire it strongly, to think positively. But vibrational reality is not moved by the intensity of desire, but by the quality of presence. The universe does not read your intentions. It reads your vibration. It feels your now. You may want love, but vibrate abandonment. You may want abundance, but vibrate scarcity. You may want healing, but vibrate resistance. And the universe responds not to what you say you want, but to what you are being. Here, now, in the depths of your most subtle thoughts and your most constant emotions. It responds to the field that you emanate in silence, not to the speech you utter out loud. That is why the practice is not to ask for more loudly. It is to sincerely scan your vibrational field. Look courageously at what is pulsing within you. Ask yourself honestly, what is the internal state that I am sustaining daily? What am I reinforcing with my habits, my thoughts, my repeated feelings? Because this state, more than any technique, is your true request. Life gives you back what you confirm in your field every day, even without realizing it. And the vibrational state does not change by chance. It changes by choice, by conscious intention, by emotional practice, by presence. You need to create internal space to feel, to regulate, to align. Small pauses throughout the day can be portals to return to the center. Breathe deeply before reacting. Be silent before deciding. Choose to vibrate truthfully, even when the mind wants to repeat old patterns. This is soul work, and it is this work that changes everything. Because when your state aligns with what your soul desires, life begins to cooperate. Synchronicities appear, doors adjust, time takes on a different rhythm, not because you forced it, but because you became compatible. And vibrational compatibility is the most silent and powerful password in the universe. You do not need to shout your requests. You only need to sustain the state that confirms that they are already real within you, because that is what creates. That is what attracts. That is what sustains. Not the wanting, but the being. Not all resistance is spiritual. Sometimes it is you insisting on the wrong door. And this truth, when accepted, can completely transform the way you deal with your blockages. Because it is easy to blame everything on spirituality, to say that it is a test, karma, an energetic attack, or even a sign from the universe to persist. But there are times when resistance is not outside, it is inside, and not as a sacred ordeal, but as an emotional stubbornness that has not yet been recognized. Persistence and stubbornness are similar on the surface. Both continue despite the difficulty. Both continue in the face of obstacles. But there is a subtle and profound difference. Persistence is born of alignment. Stubbornness is born of fear. Persistence listens to the soul. Stubbornness listens to the need to prove something. Persistence respects time. Stubbornness demands results. And often, without realizing it, the insistence that you call faith is, in fact, the refusal to let go of control. There are doors that are closed because they are no longer yours, because they were created by old versions of you, because they belong to a cycle that has already ended, but that you insist on keeping alive out of fear of the unknown. And the universe, in its silent wisdom, blocks the entrance not to punish you, but to protect you from building a future on a past that no longer supports who you are becoming. It takes humility to recognize when resistance is not spiritual but emotional, when it comes from an attachment, from an image, from a desire that has lost its meaning but still dominates your mind. And humility is not weakness. It is vibrational strength. It is the courage to let go of what no longer resonates with your truth. It is the maturity to hear the no as a redirection, to welcome closure as an opportunity for realignment. The right door does not require strength. It requires presence. It requires listening. It requires truth. When you stop insisting with your ego, you begin to receive with your soul. And everything changes, because what comes from coherence does not get sick. What comes from alignment does not weigh you down. What is truly yours does not require you to sacrifice yourself emotionally to sustain it. It comes when you become compatible. And sometimes, becoming compatible begins with the silent act of accepting that that door has already served its purpose, and that now it is time to build a new entrance, in another place, with another heart, in another vibration. Losing everything is a way for God to return you to yourself. It is a kind of silent rebirth, where the walls you built to protect yourself also fall, and with them, all the illusions of control, stability, and identity built from the outside. There is nothing more brutal, and at the same time, purer, than the moment when everything you used to define yourself falls apart before your eyes, and you see yourself naked, stripped of achievements, stripped of titles, facing the only thing that can never be taken away, your essence. Most people only find peace when all that was noise disappears, when what was excess becomes absence, when what was attachment becomes loss, because it is in the absence of the world that the true self begins to emerge. It is in the darkness that the inner light reveals itself. It is in the fall that the solid ground of being is found again, and, as paradoxical as it may seem, there is a mercy hidden in the collapse, a compassion disguised in the crumbling. God sometimes allows everything to break, not to destroy you, but so that you stop supporting a structure that was keeping you away from yourself. There are stories of men who only found meaning after bankruptcy, who only understood their purpose after abandonment, who only touched the sacred after the ground disappeared. And this is no coincidence. It is a spiritual standard. It is a divine code. Because as long as you have a place to hide, the ego continues to dictate the path. But when everything falls apart, there is no more character left. Only truth remains. And it is with this truth that the universe begins to rebuild. Losing does not mean failing. It means opening up. It means freeing up space. It means allowing the new to find a place where before, only other people's expectations, idealized images, inherited patterns lived. Losing, many times, is the most loving way that life finds to free you from the prison you didn't know you were living. Because not all prisons have bars. Some have routines. They have titles. They have stability that costs the soul. And when everything finally goes away, what is left? What is real remains. What is yours remains. What pulsates even without applause, even without a response, even without an audience. What remains is what vibrates with your most silent essence. What remains is what God placed in you when no one else was looking. And it is with this, only with this, that you truly begin the reconstruction. A reconstruction that does not depend on haste, that no longer needs to be proven. Because now, finally, you have returned home. And at home, everything blossoms differently. Everything is sustained by another root. Everything vibrates with another truth. Purpose is not discovered. It is assumed. This statement may seem uncomfortable at first, especially for those who are still waiting for an external sign, a clear revelation, a divine validation that comes from the outside in. But purpose, in its essence, is not a secret to be revealed. It is a choice to be made. It is not hidden somewhere far away. It is latent within you, just waiting for you to say yes. Waiting for the call can become Without realizing it, a subtle escape, believing that the time is not right yet, that some confirmation is needed, that one day something will happen to make everything clear, can be an elegant way of avoiding the discomfort of acting with doubt, of walking without guarantees, of being faithful to what you feel even when there is no certainty. But true awakening happens when you understand that you don't need to be completely ready. You just need to be available. There is a vibrational intelligence that guides you when you set yourself in motion. What seems confusing today becomes clear when you start acting according to what you already know deep down. When you stop waiting for certainty and start trusting in the direction. Because often, clarity does not come before the choice. It comes after. It is a consequence of surrender, not a prerequisite for the decision. The path does not show itself to those who wait. It reveals itself to those who walk. And assuming your purpose does not mean finding something grand, revolutionary, spectacular. It means accepting what beats in your heart every day. It means honoring the voice that you have silenced. It means giving shape to the call that insists on returning, even when everything around you distracts you. Purpose has nothing to do with what others will recognize. It has to do with what you can no longer ignore, with what brings you peace even without reward, with what, when lived, makes you remember who you are. A simple way to access this calling is to ask yourself, what still lives inside me, even when everything is silent? What connects me to something greater without effort, without demands? And, most importantly, what would I do even if no one ever knew? The answer to these questions does not come from the mind. It comes from the field. It comes from the heart. It comes from the body. And when you feel this answer vibrating inside, you don't need to look for it anymore. You just need to embrace it. Because what is yours vibrates. And what vibrates transforms. Even if it starts small, even if no one sees it, even if it still hurts. Purpose is not a prize for those who get it right. It is the harvest of those who decide to align themselves, even when they are shaking, even without knowing the next step. With courage, with truth, with soul, constant pain is unresolved internal resistance. And this is one of the deepest truths of the emotional and vibrational path, because not all pain that persists is linked to a fact that repeats itself outside. Often, what repeats itself is the internal pattern. It is the way you deal with it, react to it, interpret it. It is the unconscious way in which you hold on to what should have been left behind. What you resist persists, and what you embrace transforms. There is an almost automatic tendency to want to get rid of pain as quickly as possible, to reject it, to avoid it, to deny it, to explain it away mentally. But this movement creates a cycle in which pain, when avoided, grows. Because every repressed emotion seeks expression. Every energy that is ignored manifests itself in other ways. In the body, in behavior, in relationships, in a life that stops flowing. Constant pain is often a cry from the soul for attention, for listening, for integration. Resisting is not a conscious act most of the time. It is a pattern that is installed in the name of protection. It is a way of trying to control the uncontrollable, of maintaining a false sense of security. But security built on denial is an illusion, and life, with its loving wisdom, will repeat the discomfort until you choose to look, not with guilt, not with despair, but with presence, with a willingness to ask, what am I still struggling not to feel? What am I still not accepting as part of my journey? Acceptance is not resignation. It is freeing yourself from the struggle. It is allowing the energy of pain to complete its cycle, and then making room for the new. It is saying internally, I see you, I feel you, and I allow you to move on. Accepted pain transforms. Repressed pain crystallizes. And what crystallizes becomes a pattern, a shield, a wall between you and your own expansion. Healing does not happen when you overcome pain. It happens when you stop fighting it. When you recognize that internal resistance is costing you more than surrender. And surrender here is not giving up. It is vibrational wisdom. It is choosing flow instead of control. It is making room for the process to follow its natural course. because only what is accepted can be released, and only what is released can truly be healed. Repeated pain is not punishing you. It is showing you where there is still rigidity, where there is still fear, where there is still forgetfulness of your own light. And when you understand this, even pain becomes sacred because it stops being an enemy and becomes a guide, a firm but compassionate guide who only wants one thing: to give you back to yourself, whole, real, free, available to live what you came to live, with depth. You are not being tested, you are being trained. There is a huge difference between these two perceptions. The idea of being tested carries the weight of doubt, punishment, threat, as if at any moment you could fail, be rejected, be left behind. But training has another vibrational code. It carries intention, purpose, preparation. It is not made to break you, but to strengthen you. It is not to prove something to God. It is to reveal something in you. Life is not punishing you when it repeats the same challenges. It is polishing you. It is molding you. It is strengthening the part of you that still does not support what you asked for. And this is a truth that hurts, but that frees. Because if you understand that all of this is training, you stop fighting the process and start growing with it. You stop asking yourself, why is this happening to me? And start asking yourself, what is this building in me? The blacksmith shapes steel with fire, not with praise. Because steel needs heat to become strong. It needs to be heated, hammered, cooled, and remade countless times until it reaches the point of structure. And so does the soul. The soul needs to go through cycles. It needs to face its own limits, its fears, its emptiness, until it begins to remember what it is made of. Until it realizes that its strength is not in avoiding pain, but in letting itself be transformed by it. This training is not random. It is exact. It comes in proportion to your expansion, not an inch more, not a second sooner. What you are experiencing now is tuning your frequency so that it sustains what you asked for. Because wishing is easy, sustaining is something else. And the universe, which knows your essence better than your mind could ever understand, knows the right time, the right pressure, the right cut. So instead of asking how long this will last, perhaps the invitation is to ask, what am I still not recognizing here? Where do I still treat myself as someone on trial rather than someone in formation? Because you are not a mistake waiting to be approved. You are a work in progress, with patience, with purpose, with precision. And every tear you have cried in this process has value. Every day you chose to continue, even without guarantees, was noted in the field. Every silent decision to remain present, even in pain, was a vibrational response to your soul's call. You are not late. You are in training, and the training does not end when the pain goes away. It ends when you become someone who is capable of sustaining what you asked for, with truth, with presence, with spiritual maturity. The delay is the time your field needs to sustain what it asked for. This phrase may sound harsh when we are tired of waiting, when we feel that we have already done everything right, we have already vibrated, we have already asked, we have already delivered. But there is an intelligence behind the delay that cannot be ignored. Because life does not deliver what you want the moment you ask for it. It delivers it the moment you are prepared to sustain it. And this preparation is not always visible. Many times, it happens silently, in the emotional field, in the body, in the internal structures that need to be strengthened before something greater arrives. You can even achieve something quickly. You can even manifest with willpower. But if your field is not yet aligned, what has arrived will fall apart. Not because it was taken away, but because there was not enough of a foundation to maintain it. Haste leads to collapse. Forced insistence leads to wear and tear. And what was a blessing becomes a burden, because the external cannot sustain what the internal has not yet absorbed. That is why so many people conquer, but do not maintain. They achieve, but do not feel. They receive, but do not enjoy, because the field was not prepared, because the emotion was not stabilized, because the ego was still in control. And when the ego leads, everything is rushed. Everything gets confused. Everything is demanded. But when the soul leads, time becomes an ally. Pausing becomes fertility. Delay becomes polishing. Think of all the times when something did not work out. And today, looking back, you understand why it could not have worked. Not because you did not deserve it, but because there was still no structure. There were still unseen fears, unhealed beliefs, unaligned relationships. You were not yet who you needed to be to sustain that with lightness, with depth, with truth, and the universe, with its subtle precision, held you back. Not out of malice, but out of mercy. You asked for something big, something true, something with roots. So, the preparation will also be great, not because God takes time, but because your soul needs this time to become compatible. And there are no shortcuts to this vibrational maturity. It is in silence. It is in discipline. It is in fidelity to the invisible. It is in the choice to continue cleaning yourself, strengthening yourself, realigning yourself, even when the world out there still doesn't confirm anything. The delay is not punishment. It is construction. It is life saying, I have already heard you. Now I am molding you. And when you are ready, it will no longer be about speed. It will be about constancy. It will be about lightness. It will be about peace. Because what arrives at the right time remains. And what remains becomes a vibrational legacy, not to impress, but to sustain, to serve, to expand. In the name of something greater than your desire. In the name of what you truly came to manifest. With roots, with maturity, with soul. God does not build in a hurry. He builds with perfection. And this perfection has nothing to do with the absence of mistakes or spectacular results. It has to do with coherence, with a firm foundation, with the exact time in which something can be born, grow and remain without being lost. In nature, nothing is rushed. Nothing happens before its time. The tree does not blossom before it takes root. The seed does not burst before it matures in the dark. And it is the same with the soul. God does not force the process. He respects the rhythm of inner creation. Divine perfection is vibrational. It is made of subtleties, of repetitions that seem meaningless until, one day, everything connects. Until you understand why you had to stop, why you had to wait, why you had to feel what you felt. There is no solid construction in the frequency of urgency, because urgency does not come from the soul. Urgency comes from the ego, from need, from fear. And God does not build on fear. He builds on surrender. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Nature never hurries, and yet all things are accomplished." This phrase holds ancient wisdom, because nature is constantly creating, but never collapsing. It acts with precision, with beauty, with patience. And this patience is strength. It is confidence. It is the certainty that each step is sacred, that nothing is standing still. It is just being nourished from within. The same goes for your process. Even if you don't see it, there is something being built in the invisible, deep within your field, in the folds of your inner time. Often, your greatest request is not being denied. It is being prepared with a level of care that can only be sustained by those who have already chosen to trust. To trust even without signs. To trust even without control. To trust even without apparent logic. And this trust is not passivity. It is spiritual maturity. It is you saying with your vibration, I don't see, but I know. I don't understand, but I trust. I don't control, but I receive. This vibrational posture opens doors that effort would never open. Because effort without alignment is exhaustion, but presence with trust is magnetism. You become a receptive field, not through insistence, but through resonance. And what comes through resonance arrives at the right time, in the right way, with the lightness of someone who doesn't need to prove anything, only to truly sustain that which has already become part of themselves. God does not build in a hurry, because haste creates cracks. But where there is vibrational solidity, He builds with beauty, with depth, with eternity. And what is eternal doesn't need to rush, because it already is, because it already vibrates, because it already pulses at the same frequency as what came to remain. God's silence is not rejection, it is instruction. This perception changes everything, because there are times when you pray, Feel, seek, surrender, and the return seems not to come. The sky seems closed. The answer does not arrive. The signal does not appear. And then the ego begins to tell stories. Stories of abandonment, of error, of inadequacy. But the soul knows. It knows that silence is not punishment. It is a language, a deeper language, more subtle, more precise. God does not shout. He whispers. And often it is in silence that he teaches the most important lessons. Lessons that cannot be put into words. Lessons that cannot be explained logically. Lessons that can only be understood in the body, in time, in the flow. Silence is a field of revelation, not of absence. And what seems like a delay can be the exact moment of vibrational reprogramming, the pause before the leap, the stillness before the response. There are silences that come to align, to free you from dependence on external signs, to remind you that the compass is within, to return you to your own listening. Because if you don't learn to trust without hearing, you will never trust when you hear. If you don't learn to sustain without seeing, you will never be able to receive when everything comes. Silence teaches you to walk with your soul, not with your eyes. And often, the signs are there, not in the format you expected, but in the repetition of patterns, in the closing of doors, in the discomforts that insist on returning. God speaks through the details. He manifests himself in what is repeated, in the seemingly random encounters, in the phrases that echo, in the pauses that bother. And when you develop symbolic listening, everything becomes a message. Each event becomes a vibrational mirror. Each repetition becomes a reminder. Each no becomes protection. The technique is not to decipher in a hurry. It is to observe with presence. It is to allow the meaning to come with time, with surrender, with the opening of the heart. Because divine instruction does not come as a command, it comes as intuition, as silent certainty, as a feeling of alignment, even when there is no explanation. And this instruction, when respected, changes your trajectory. You stop forcing, you stop demanding, you stop comparing yourself, and you start walking more lightly, with more truth, with more confidence, because even when there is no word, there is care. Even when there is no answer, there is guidance. Even when there is no noise, there is direction. God's silence is not absence. It is the deepest preparation for that which, when it finally comes, will be recognized not with surprise, but with a breath of the soul. Now I understand. This is what was being gestated. And then everything makes sense. Not because it was explained, but because it was lived, felt, integrated, silently, with presence, with faith, with soul. Every crisis is a breaking point between who you were and who you were born to be. And this rupture, as painful as it may seem, is not a mistake. It is a birth, a deep vibrational transition, which begins within before manifesting itself outside. When the soul can no longer bear the inconsistency between what you experience and who you really are, something breaks, something falls apart, something collapses. And this collapse is sacred. You may feel as if you are losing control, as if everything is slipping through your fingers, as if there is no ground left. But what is crumbling is not you. It is the character. It is the image. It is the identity that was built based on fear, on the need for acceptance, on the desire for security. What breaks is what can no longer accompany you, and what is left is the beginning of a reunion. The pain of a crisis is not punishment. It is contraction, like the earth that cracks before it blooms, like the body that bends before birth, like the silence that precedes revelation. A crisis is the moment when the soul says, "I can't live half-heartedly anymore." And this silent cry is accompanied by discomfort, yes, by doubt, yes, by nights without answers. But it also comes with power, with clarity, with liberation. If it hurts, it is because there is a transition taking place, a transition between frequencies, between internal realities, between structures that no longer support you and a new truth that is still being formed. And there is no way to speed up this process. It needs to be felt. It needs to be welcomed. It needs to be traversed with presence. Because what is being born is not something external. It is you, whole, you, in coherence, you, without the filters that the world has taught you to use. When experienced consciously, a crisis becomes a rite of passage. It marks the end of one phase and the beginning of another. It purifies, it reveals, it redefines. And even when it still seems dark, the seed has already been planted. Something is already moving in the field. A new vibration is already being organized, just waiting for you to accept the journey, without rushing, without pressure, with humility, with courage, with love. Because those who go through a crisis with soul do not return the same. They return more whole, more true, more present. They return with deeper roots and wider wings. They return knowing that the pain did not destroy them. It rebuilt them. And this silent reconstruction is what will sustain the new version of your life. Not a perfect life, but a life in alignment, in truth, in purpose. And that no one can take away, because it was conquered with presence, with soul, and with faith. Pain was the invisible scaffolding of your purpose. While you felt frustration, discouragement, even resistance, God was building your inner structure. Every tear, every hesitation, every moment of silence was an essential part of this divine work. Napoleon Hill reminded us that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The seed is already planted in the fertile soil of your soul. It is up to you to choose to water it with presence, faith, and surrender, instead of running away from the earth that nourishes you. Tony Robbins pointed out that people are not lazy. They just have weak goals. Perhaps the pain you experienced was a call to redefine, so that your goals are not mental, but vibrational, not superficial, but anchored in your truth. The silence of now, it matters. It is the rehearsal for the public force that will come. It is the soil where your roots are deepening, so that when the first leaves appear, the trunk is already firm enough to withstand the storms. Stop asking for haste. Start asking for structure. Ask your heart, what am I building in myself while I wait? The answer will come in the form of calm, presence, and inner conviction. It is this construction that will sustain the purpose in any condition. The pain you feel is not a hard hammer. It is the hammer of a wise creator. It is the measured beat that is shaping the steel of your essence. Keep going with an open heart. Keep going with confidence. Because God is with you, not as a spectator, but as a loving master builder. If this journey touched you deeply, share your vibe in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue building this bridge between the invisible and the manifest together. The work is still ongoing, but it grows, and you grow with it.